Welcome to the Freak Show, fellow freaks.
I'm Matthew Brockmeyer.
And I'm Christa Carmen.
And this is
Murder Coaster.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to part 2 of The Killer, Jerry Lee Lewis. Jerry Lee Lewis was a scorching ball of fire, an unstoppable force of nature, dripping with musical talent, whose music is beloved around the world. But he was also an out-of-control sociopath, a liar and thief, an incestuous drug-addled madman, a bigamist, absentee father, a tax cheat, a violent and cruel drunk, and quite possibly a murderer. This is his story.
Let's begin. Chapter 1, Iowa, 1959. After his fall from grace, life had become an endless stream of honky-tonks and juke joints for the killer, Jerry Lee Lewis. Less than a year earlier, he'd been a celebrated rock and roll star with 2 number-1 hits, playing sold-out auditoriums for thousands of dollars a night. But after it was discovered he was a bigamist who'd married his 13-year-old cousin, radio stations refused to play him, stores wouldn't carry his records, and now he was forced to play half-empty dive bars and roadhouses, lucky to make $100.
He played a show in Kansas. Only 2 old ladies showed up, but the killer always put on a good show, and he played his heart out for them and didn't even charge them a dime. He was playing a honky-tonk somewhere in Iowa in 1959, singing a Hank Williams song, when a drunk good old boy began to holler at him with a voice so loud it drowned out the music.
"You son of a bitch!"
Jerry Lee stopped the music. Gazing out into the smoke, he saw the man, a slovenly and fat guy in a dirty t-shirt. The man had not only insulted Jerry, but he dared to scream the insult while Jerry was playing Hank Williams, the hillbilly Shakespeare, a man who was a saint to Jerry Lee and his family. The music of Hank Williams was sacred, holy. No one defamed it. And for this, the man would have to pay.
So Jerry fixed the man in his gaze and commanded,
"Why don't you march your dead butt up here and say that to my face?"
"I will," the man screamed, pushing his way to the stage. And as he began to step up onto it, Jerry Lee took his microphone stand and slammed the heavy weighted bass right into the drunk's face.
As the man keeled over backwards, blood erupted from his nose and he landed with a thud on his back, knocked out cold in a puddle of spilled beer, blood, and cigarette butts.
The audience gasped. "My God, he's killed him!" someone shouted.
Jerry Lee Lewis, still clutching the microphone stand, then leapt into the audience, howling, "Anybody else want some? You? How about you? I'll give you all some of it."
Not a soul dared to challenge the killer.
The man he'd hit in the face wasn't dead, though he was seriously hurt. An ambulance was called and hauled him away to the hospital as the police came to investigate it.
Jerry Lee said he was just defending himself, asking,
What do you think is gonna happen when you try to get on stage and threaten the killer?
The matter was dropped, and it wouldn't be the last time he used the microphone stand as a weapon. In fact, he'd become known for it.
There were always a lot of fights back then as he made the rounds, going from a rundown bowling alley in Tampa, Florida, to that Peppermint Lounge in Pittsburgh, a drive-in movie theater in New York, even the Adele Elementary School auditorium in Georgia.
He'd play anywhere that would have him, from dive bars in Los Angeles to county fairs in Tennessee. As he said,
"Wasn't no place too far for me to go to sing my songs. Wasn't no place too rough. I played Bad Bob's, played Hernando's Hideaway, played for the love of it, for the joy of playing. And I built my audience back up again, rebuilt my whole foundation. I went in them honky-tonks and them nightclubs, and I went on with it. Had to keep on going, because if you quit, you die. And I wasn't raised to quit. It was brutal. I tell you, it was killing, but it was beautiful."
playing in Newport, Arkansas, he saw the stage had been wrapped in chicken wire to protect him from flying bottles. But that didn't sit right with the killer. Felt too much like hiding, so he told them to take it down.
The owner said that chicken wire's there to protect you. But Jerry insisted, hissing at him, "Take it down."
That night he played all the hillbilly classics. Hank Williams, Jimmy Rogers, Moon Mullican, honky-tonk sentimental music about loving your mama and the women who'd done you wrong. Then he gave them raw, gut-bucket blues, just like he'd heard as a child hiding under the table of Hanny's big house.
Then, when the crowd was near exhaustion, he leapt up, kicked the piano stool across the stage, and gave them the old boogie-woogie rock and roll, playing till his fingers ached, playing till the sun had risen, and daylight began to stream through the windows, leaving them all breathless and exhausted.
Not a single bottle was thrown or curse given.
Then he got into his dusty Cadillac, drove to the next town, and did it all again, fueled by speed and liquor.
He took to keeping a bottle of whiskey atop the piano, dropping Benzedrine pills into it to be dissolved in the liquor, the road a haze of rowdy drunks, cheap perfume, and run-down motels. But the killer persisted.
Chapter 2. So much to see in Tennessee. He may not have been a rich rock star, but Jerry Lee was making a decent living and managed to buy a little house there in Myra's hometown of Coral Lake, Tennessee, with a swimming pool and a white grand piano. But he was seldom there, always on the road.
Rock and roll itself was dying. Little Richard became a preacher and stopped playing rock and roll. Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and J.P. Richardson, a.k.a. the Big Bopper, all died in a plane crash. And Chuck Berry was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for transporting a 14-year-old girl across state lines for immoral purposes.
What the fuck is up with all the fucking pedophilia? I mean, say what you want about drugs, violence, cheating, orgies. That shit's all consenting adults doing adult shit. Leave the underage kids alone, man. Come on, Chuck Berry, what the fuck?
And on February 27th, 1959, Myra, who was only 15 years old, gave birth to a baby boy.
Jerry named him Steve Allen, in honor of the television host who took a chance on him and launched him into the homes of America.
In 1961, Jerry achieved a minor hit, showing the world he wasn't beat yet, when he recorded Ray Charles' What I'd Say, making it to number 30 on the Billboard Top Hits. For Jerry Lee, it was an honor to record the song, as Ray Charles was a musician he deeply respected and looked up to, always respectfully referring to him as Mr. Charles.
Oddly enough, Jerry Lee was now more popular than ever in England, the country that had effectively destroyed his career, and he was being flooded with requests to return there. So, the killer decided to return to the United Kingdom and show them what's what. And then, tragedy struck.
Two days before he was to leave for England, on Easter Sunday 1962, tragedy struck when little Steve Allen was found dead in the swimming pool. The swimming pool wasn't being used at the time, but it had been raining and had partially filled. While 17-year-old Myra was making lunch, 3-year-old Steve Allen had toddled out and fell inside.
Jerry Lee, who was off playing a show, always off somewhere playing a show, would say, "It knocked me to my knees, but you don't see me crying, don't see me carrying on. I accepted it. What can you do but accept it and live with it? I didn't question God. The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away."
Jerry went on to England, which some saw as callous in the wake of the death of his son, but there was no stopping the killer, and he arrived to see huge banners saying, "Welcome back, Jerry Lee."
He entered the stage running, sliding on his knees across the floor to the piano, then leaping up and windmilling his hands across the keyboard, giving them British the old boogie-woogie, that ancient African beat that would shake one from their clothes.
For the encore, he danced atop his piano as fans stormed the stage, then ran to his dressing room where they tried to beat the door down, having to be escorted by security to a waiting car as a crowd climbed atop it, eager for a glance through the window at the killer in the flesh.
5 years earlier, when he'd been in England, reviewers called him a drooling bumpkin that made noise, not music. But now, the reviews in England read,
"What Jerry Lee Lewis does on stage is so beyond the realms of human imagination, no one can fully anticipate the aura of sheer magical excitement which he creates."
Back in the States, Jerry Lee got a regular gig playing at a nightclub called The Oriental in Memphis, and the owner hung a giant neon image of him over the club, nearly 2 stories tall. He'd always be big in Memphis. Sorry, it's a cheesy dad joke there.
On August 30th, 1963, Phoebe Allen Lewis was born. But the relationship with Myra was growing strained. She felt he blamed her for little Steve drowning.
Jerry then went back to Europe for another tour, playing in Germany at the Star Club, where a new rock and roll band opened up for him. A little group you may have heard of called The Beatles.
I think I've heard of them. The show was recorded and is thought by many to be the greatest live rock and roll record ever produced, live at the Star Club.
It sounds as if the piano is breaking, literally being destroyed as Jerry Lee pounded on it with every part of his body, giving a musical history of rock and roll. Hound Dog, Long Tall Sally, Good Golly Miss Molly, all the way to a whole lot of shaking. And then his heartfelt version of Hank Williams' Your Cheating Heart, which is said to be the most passionate recording of a Hank Williams song ever recorded.
While this record is treasured and hoarded and loved, often talked about by musical historians, Jerry Lee Lewis never received a penny from it.
Meanwhile, in February of 1964, that little band that opened for him that night, the Beatles, were making quite the breakout. Playing on the Ed Sullivan Show, stuffy old Ed, who refused to play Jerry Lee back in the day. And now, Beatlemania was taking over the world.
Jerry would say about the young upstarts from Liverpool,
I never did care for the Beatles all that much, to tell you the truth.
He toured and toured, relentless, recording songs, none of them gaining traction anywhere besides Memphis or Alabama, relying more and more on pills to keep going, amphetamines to power and barbiturates to calm him, now mixing them together. As he said,
That was blues and yellows time. I tell you, the greatest pills ever made. People said they made me crazy, but I was crazy before the blues and yellows. They would keep me going. Sebutol, and man, you couldn't beat Desubol. Went hundreds of miles a day on them. Biamphetamines, black beauties, placidils, up and down. I took them all.
In 1965, in Grand Prairie, Texas, the law was on to them, and members of his band were busted for prescription pills. Jerry Lee saying,
Well, I guess my reputation for all that stuff went ahead of me, and I had to live up to it. Had to travel hundreds and thousands of miles a day, play good music, take care of the women, too.
He worked tirelessly to promote himself. He'd go to radio stations and slip DJs $100 bills to play his songs, saying,
Grease them pockets, and I started getting my albums on the air again. 300, 500, whatever it took. Money makes the mare trot, as Mama used to say. It wound up the clock every time.
He'd always loved guns, and he began collecting them. Nickel-plated .357s, machine guns, even famously wearing a holster on stage, sometimes placing his pistol atop the piano before a performance.
Chapter 3, Nashville and Shakespeare.
Memphis was the heart of rock and roll, home of Sun Records and Elvis Presley. But Nashville, home of the Grand Ole Opry, was the heart of country.
Jerry Lee's old friend Johnny Cash was burning up country charts, putting out a string of #1 hits, such as Ring of Fire. And for a long time, folks have been trying to talk Jerry Lee into putting out some country songs. And finally, Jerry's promotion manager, a rodeo rider named Eddie Kilroy, convinced Jerry Lee to come to Nashville and record a real country song, written by Jerry Chestnut, a song called Another Place, Another Time.
Another Place, Another Time was a true blue country tear-jerk song, with a slow thumping piano and a lonesome fiddle in the background, full of grit and heartache, all heart and emotion. None of that boogie-woogie pyrotechnics, no audacious, virtuoso speed playing. Although it was simple, Jerry Lee felt in his heart it could be a hit.
After recording Another Place, Another Time, Jerry was then invited to play Iago in Shakespeare's Othello, in a version of the play set to rock and roll music in Los Angeles. He was intrigued, had never done anything like that. So at 35 years old, he began training to become a Shakespearean actor.
He took it deadly serious, memorizing the complicated lines, rehearsing 12 hours a day, singing the sonnets from a green and gold grand piano, which went surprisingly well with boogie-woogie music.
I'll try to do this. Everybody. I'll even with him, wife for wife, make him jealous and plague his life. That thought that gnaws my inside, the new well, no, never shall my soul be satisfied by lust of the blood, permission of the will. I'll have my revenge and I'm gonna have a fill. Man, I would have loved to have seen this. Can you imagine?
No, I can't imagine. Although you did just do a good job, allowing me to try to imagine it.
Thank you.
And Jerry Lee would say,
"Never thought I'd do anything like this. That Shakespeare was something. I wonder what Shakespeare would have thought of my music."
Though some reviews noted he recited his lines with a Louisiana accent and did mumble a few times, they were all extremely positive. One review stated,
"Jerry Lee Lewis, Louisiana-born genius with fiddle, drum, and piano, played a unique Iago, delivering the lines extremely well. But his big coup was the way he played the psychedelic green and gold grand piano to punctuate his attack on Othello's susceptibilities."
The play ran for 5 weeks, grossing over $500,000, and there was talk of taking it to Broadway, but Jerry Lee declined, later saying,
"Now I wish I'd gone ahead and done it. I knew I could handle it, but I never was so glad when something was over. Doing that play had showed me how hard it was. It was a work. He didn't understand. I just play piano and sing songs. I love that."
Later, at a concert in London, in the middle of a whole lot of shaking going on, he started reciting lines from Othello to his English audience.
"Divinity of hell, when devils with the blackest sins put on, they do suggest at first with heavenly shows, as I do now."
Someone in the audience screamed out Rodrigo's line to him, "Thou didst hold him in thy hate."
And Jerry bellowed back, "Despise me if I do not. I have told you often, and I will tell you again and again, I hate the more. Off cap to him, and by the faith of man, I no price. I am worth no worse a place."
When Jerry Lee got back to Tennessee, Another Place, Another Time was a #1 hit on the country Billboard Top 10, and Jerry Lee was rushed into the studio to record 3 more songs, what they called hard country, but not because it had a hard beat or rock crossover, but because the music was rough and raw, not overproduced and flowery.
As biographer Rick Bragg would say in the book Jerry Lee Lewis, His Own Story, quote,
"It was music for people who work in steel plants and cotton mills, who slung wrenches and drove trucks and wiped the tables at the Waffle House. Many of them were the same rock and rollers who had shook it till it hurt when the music was still new and dangerous, but they had gotten a little older. Rock and roll had deserted them with top 40 playlists, so they had simply gone home to country music."
Chapter 4, The Country Western Star and the Return of the King. By the end of 1968, 10 years since his fall from the graces of rock and roll, Jerry Lee Lewis was the hottest country western artist in the nation, recording #1 hit after #1 hit. Like To Make Love Sweeter for You, She Still Comes Around, What's Made Milwaukee Famous, over 30 #1 country hits in a row.
But Jerry Lee Lewis would never consider himself to be a country western singer, just a rock and roller who was reaching back to his roots. Nashville may have put him back on top again, but Memphis is where his heart would always lie.
As Jerry Lee rose to the top of the country charts, Elvis Presley staged a huge comeback, cementing himself as the king of rock and roll. In December of 1968, he did a television special, his first live performance in 7 years, and the king tore it up, coming out dressed all in black leather with an electric guitar, looking both dangerous and handsome in equal measure, reminding the world what all that fuss in the 1950s had been about.
The show topped the Nielsen ratings, and suddenly his songs were all back in the Billboard charts. And then he proceeded to perform a series of legendary shows in Las Vegas. The king was back.
And it was back to huge packed arenas for the killer, Jerry Lee Lewis, as well. He even played a hippie festival with his old friends Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, and Little Richard. A festival where the new breed of long-haired crazy rock stars were showing off their stuff, like Alice Cooper, who bit the head off a chicken.
Ugh, always crazy to hear that one. Not to be outdone by Elvis's television special, Jerry Lee did his own, called The Many Sounds of Jerry Lee, where he displayed his stunning diversity, reaching back to his blues and boogie-woogie origins, and playing drums for Turn On Your Love Light, guitar for Green Green Grass of Home, and singing Danny Boy a cappella. Then absolutely wowing folks at home with his insane piano playing, his hands windmilling on Ray Charles' What I Say.
November 14th, 1969, astronaut Charles Conrad Jr. brought a collection of Jerry Lee Lewis songs on Apollo 12 and played a whole lot of shaking going on the moon. They were playing his music on the moon.
That's wild. The killer was officially back with a vengeance, and once again, he was buying his parents' Cadillacs.
Chapter 5, Junior.
Every day I walk the floor and think of you, and every night I pray the Lord will see me through. Every time I think I find a love that's true, I fall right back to walk the floor and think of you. Once there was a time when I had everything, and once around my finger was...
Despite having abandoned numerous wives and children, and basically grooming, abducting, gaslighting, and committing statutory rape on his own 13-year-old cousin, Jerry Lee Lewis claimed family meant everything to him.
While he treated most women as either inferior beings or straight-up objects, he worshipped his mother. She was his everything. And his own father still went out on tour with him, was part bodyguard, part tour manager, and had once chased Chuck Berry off with a knife after he threatened to sock Jerry Lee in a moment of absolute drunken insanity.
Jerry says that after the incident with his father and Chuck Berry, when he woke up in the morning, his father and Chuck Berry were at the restaurant eating breakfast together as if nothing had happened.
As Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones, who adored both Jerry Lee and Chuck Berry and viewed them as gods, would often say, "It's only rock and roll, darling."
So, in some classic rockabilly fashion that honored the family tradition, he brought his 15-year-old son, Jerry Lee Jr., from his second wife, Jane, to come play drums for him on the road.
The apple didn't fall far from the tree when it came to old Junior. Blonde hair swept up atop his head, and a natural-born musician, pounding out the beat right behind his daddy, who'd look over at him and smile, saying, "My boy, my boy."
Meanwhile, Myra hired detectives to follow Jerry Lee on tour and document his infidelities, and in 1970, filed for divorce, alleging he beat her and threatened to kill her.
And once the divorce was finalized, Myra promptly married the private detective that she'd hired.
Whoa, plot twist. And Jerry Lee's cousin, Jimmy Swaggart's star was rising. He had gone from a traveling tent revival preacher to hosting a syndicated radio show called The Camp Meeting Hour, where he told listeners to press their hands against the radio speakers and they would be healed. And if they wanted to be saved, above all, to send money. Money, 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 send money and you will be saved. And they did.
Jimmy Swaggart's radio show went out to 550 radio stations and became the largest daily gospel program on the earth. He was an absolute star himself, with hit after hit album of gospel music. Many songs he had played with his rascal cousin on that old upright piano Elmo had mortgaged the family farm for.
And Cousin Jimmy would preach about Jerry Lee, how he played the devil's music, warning of the wages of sin, and would begin to weep on stage.
Yeah, crying was one of his signature moves. Tears streaming, face all grimaced with the woe of the devil's power. Just like that time Jerry Lee had taken him to the movies when they were children, and Cousin Jimmy had cried over his moral failings as Jerry laughed in his face and ate popcorn.
Jimmy Swaggart would say that Jerry Lee's fame was built on glitter and glamour, and, quoting Proverbs, said, "There is a way which seemeth right unto a man, but in the end they are the ways of death."
Perhaps old Jerry Lee was listening to his preaching cousin, taking him seriously. For Jerry Lee Lewis, trying to be a good example to his son, decided to change his ways.
Yes, Jerry Lee Lewis, the killer, renounced the rock and roll lifestyle and decided to become a good Christian.
He stated he would play no more shows where liquor was served and would end every show with gospel and preaching. He swore off drinking and cursing and pills and the attention of loose women, telling reporters, "I've gone back to the church and I got myself saved and the Lord forgave me of my sins and wiped them away."
Hallelujah. The devil's own Jerry Lee Lewis had been washed clean in the blood of the Lamb.
He performed Sunday services at country churches, singing the songs he grew up with. "I'll Fly Away," "Amazing Grace," and "Old Rugged Cross," shouting, "Glory to God, there will be peace in the valley too, brother. I'm looking for that day."
Then he'd introduce the crowd to his son, saying,
"Jerry Lee Lewis Jr. is playing drums. Jr. comes from Faraday, Louisiana, and he takes to wear his hair long. But I'm not really worried about his hair. He's a good boy. I'm just worried about his soul, him being saved. I love him with all my heart. He's my only boy."
He then recorded a studio gospel album entitled In Loving Memories, having his dear mother sing a chorus on the title track.
But then the unthinkable happened. On April 21st, 1971, his beloved mother, Mammy, fell sick and died, the most precious thing in his life. And with that, he abandoned Jesus, abandoned the church life, and went right back to his old ways of sinning, liquor, rock and roll, drugs, and fast women.
That didn't last long, did it?
Sure didn't.
Chapter 6. The Killer Rocks On. October, Jerry Lee married a 29-year-old secretary from the Memphis Sheriff's Department named Jaren Pate, saying he had no choice because she was pregnant.
They were together for only 2 weeks before they bitterly separated. But the marriage would actually stay legal until her mysterious death 10 years later.
Jaren gave birth to a little girl named Lori Lee Lewis. And though Jerry Lee was listed as the father on the birth certificate, he'd say he was not the father and refuse any responsibility, just like the second child he'd had with Jane.
Now headed back to his old rockin' ways, he recorded an album called The Killer Rocks On, including a rock and roll song written by his old friend the Big Bopper back in 1958, Chantilly Lace.
Jerry Lee rewrote the whole thing, word for word, changing the Big Bopper's iconic opening to,
"Hello, you good-looking thing, you. This is the killer speaking."
Chantilly Lace spent 3 weeks as the #1 song on Billboard's Hot Country Singles chart and was a top 50 pop hit in the United States and England.
He played Elvis's Don't Be Cruel and Fats Domino's I'm Walking, as well as the classic old song C.C. Rider, which we'd heard as a kid at Annie's Big House. He'd always return to the music he heard there as a child.
He then set to spending the millions of dollars he'd made as a country western singer and gospel preacher, partying like a rock star legend. It was on.
He grew a beard, let his hair fall down around his shoulders, and was back to climbing on top the piano and kicking the living shit out of it. Telling reporters backstage in Paris, France, "I give my audience what it wants. They want it that way. They want someone that's mean, that turns over pianos, that turns over Rolls Royces, that gets married when he's ready. That's the killer. You know? The killer. Killer, killer."
He even recorded that old drinking blues song Wine Spo D.O.D. that had been his first professional gig at the Ford dealership decades ago.
He now charged a $10,000 minimum to perform a night and bought his own airplane, a DC-3 big enough to host a non-stop party, flying from show to television special and back again.
Jerry Lee and Elvis had the same doctor, George Nicopolis, whom they called Dr. Nick, and he'd supply whatever pills the killer wanted. Methamphetamine to go for days, barbiturates to sleep it off, and everything in between.
In a drug and alcohol haze, he became ornery and grumpy and crazy. During one show in England, he lost it on the British drummer, mid-performance, for not keeping up, and fired him right there, kicking him off the stage. Then, like he'd done in the saloons in New Orleans as a teenager, he played drums with his left hand and the piano with his right.
There were car chases with the law, drunken wrecks, but he was royalty in the South, and there wasn't a cop in Tennessee willing to charge him. They'd just throw him in the drunk tank for the night and let him go in the morning.
He'd long been banned from ever playing on the Grand Ole Opry because of his reputation as a rock and roll bad boy. Something that hurt his heart, as his mama loved the Grand Ole Opry. But then in 1973, his legend now firmly in place, he was invited to the Ryman Auditorium to play on the Grand Ole Opry.
Some were fearful that he'd do something obnoxious, be a crazy man, play the dreaded boogie-woogie and disrespect their piano by leaping up on it and playing with his dirty boots.
Johnny Cash had famously kicked in the stage lights and gave everyone the finger before getting kicked off. But Jerry Lee, was on his best behavior, played all his country hits and killed it. And when the crowd called out to him to play some rock and roll, to play Johnny Be Good, well, he gave them what they wanted.
In September, he recorded an album in Memphis called Southern Roots. He was surly and drinking whiskey, popping pills, insulting the producer, threatened to kill the photographer. In his haze, creating a mean, gritty, raunchy album that was beloved by his crazy fans. He was unstoppable.
Playing a show in Los Angeles, a scruffy young man in round spectacles approached him backstage, fell to his knees, and kissed Jerry Lee's feet, saying, "I just wanted you to know what you meant to me. You made it possible for me to be a rock and roll singer."
Jerry Lee Lewis looked down at John Lennon, literally kissing his boots, and said, "Well, thank you. That's mighty flattering."
That's fucking crazy, man. He bought a house in Mississippi by a lake with pastures and stables and a piano-shaped swimming pool. He lived there with his father Elmo and his son Junior, dreaming of growing old and playing with his grandchildren. But that was not to happen.
On November 13th, 1973, just days after his 19th birthday, Junior headed out in his Jeep, a present from Jerry Lee, to pick up an old Ford pickup truck and tow it back to the house. But as he took the curve on Holly Springs Highway, he struck the abutment of a bridge, lost control, flipping the Jeep and killing him.
The funeral, like all the many, many before it, was held there in Faraday, Louisiana, at the Pentecostal Church of God, and Junior was buried in the cemetery, where Jerry's mother, brother, his other son, his aunts and uncles and nephews were all laid to rest.
Jerry would say about the death of his namesake son,
"I didn't know a thing could hurt that bad. Seemed like I was always on my way to the graveyard. At one time, it seemed like I was burying somebody every week. If it wasn't my mama, it was my boys. A steady stream, and it would just keep going and going and going. And I would put my suit and my tie, and I would get it done. I buried my people and still didn't break down. Because you got to be strong, don't you? You got to be strong. I lost my 2 boys, and I went on living."
Went on in a violent drunken blur, getting into car wrecks and fistfights. At a bar in Memphis, he started brawling and got his nose broken, affecting his singing voice.
Sometimes while performing, in the middle of a song, he'd stop and then stare mean-eyed out in the audience, daring someone to say something, to open their mouth, challenging the entire venue to start something with the killer.
He'd switched from Cadillacs to Rolls Royces, and now was into Corvettes, though he couldn't seem to keep them on the road. As he says,
"Corvettes, I wrecked a dozen of them. I was coming home one time, might have been drinking, and I ran one up under the front porch of a house, and a little girl came out, eyes real big. I just said, 'Top of the morning to you.' She run inside, and this woman stuck her head out of the door and said, 'Oh Lord, it's Jerry Lee.'"
While he's bragging and telling this seemingly amusing tale, he seems to miss the fact that he could have killed this little girl and her mother, 2 innocent people, and that his own namesake son was killed in a car accident.
He does seem to miss so much irony. His son Steve Allen died in a swimming pool, so he buys a new house with a pool shaped like a piano. And personally, I don't know if I could have a swimming pool if I'd lost a child in one. And he blamed Myra for Steve Allen's death. But she was just 17 at the time, a child herself that he basically abandoned to go out on the road and openly have affairs.
And while he claimed family meant everything to him, he'd completely abandoned his wife Jaren and his daughter Lori Lee Lewis, refusing to even acknowledge she was his daughter. He gave them no support, and they actually ended up on welfare, struggling to survive, while he gleefully wrecked $100,000 sports cars.
In March of 1975, Jerry Lee Lewis, quote, brutally and savagely attacked a waitress at Bad Bob's Lounge in Memphis with a fiddle bow and was convicted of assault and battery. He'd claim he was blacked out drunk and didn't remember it, but that doesn't change the fact that he beats women, even complete strangers.
He's also fully armed, always carrying a pistol of some sort, pearl-handled automatics, snub-nosed .38s, 22 Derringers, drunkenly shooting holes in walls. He had an office next to a dentist, and when the dentist came into work in the morning, he found his office shot to hell, a collection of antique dentures destroyed, because Jerry Lee had been drunkenly shooting holes in the walls of his office all night.
Collecting antique dentures. That is so weird and definitely something I would do. I love it. I would definitely collect that. Shame they got all shot up.
It's so weird.
It is. I love teeth are weird, you know? Like I got a bunch of teeth around here. You know what I had a bunch of? I lost them somewhere. Glass eyes. Antique ones.
That's weird.
I had an opportunity. Oh, this weird. It was like a curiosity weird shop.
Yeah, that's wild.
I had an opportunity to buy a binder of them, and I know I really fucked up by not doing it. I'm still kicking myself for not buying that. Yeah, and of course, Jerry thought it was funny that he shot all those teeth up.
He started hanging out at the Palomino Club in the San Fernando Valley outside Los Angeles, a place where the old-time greats would hang out. Johnny Cash, Merle Haggard, Willie Nelson, Patsy Cline, Jerry Jeff Walker, even George Harrison and Bob Dylan.
A television documentary captured Jerry Lee Lewis playing there, and it was insane. He's completely wasted. He's got his shirt off and tied around his waist. His nose is still swollen from being broken in a barroom fight. His face is red and sweaty, and he's just mumbling the words, the whole lot of shaking. Can't understand what he's saying. And then he sticks his face right in the camera and growls, "And I'm looking at every good-looking thing in America right now. Meat man, you know what I am."
The Rolling Stones would come to pay homage to him there. Mick Jagger once bringing a pile of records for him to sign, and Jerry saying, "I ain't gonna sign all them records."
In September of 1976, Jerry Lee was celebrating his 41st birthday when a guy named Dagwood Man, what a name, Dagwood Man. Well, Dagwood gave Jerry Lee a big old .357 Magnum revolver, saying, "Careful, it's got a hair trigger."
Jerry turned to his bass player, Butch Owen, and said,
"Butch, look down the barrel of this."
Then shot at a Coke bottle beside Butch. The bottle exploding and the bullet ricocheting into Butch's chest.
Butch screamed.
I've been shot!"
Jerry calmly replied, "It appears to be that way, Butch."
"Why? Oh, why did I get shot?"
"'Cause you appear to be sitting in the wrong spot."
Chapter 6. The Killer and the King.
As the 1970s progressed, everything swirled into chaos and madness. Jaron was suing him over abandonment. Bandmates quit and sued him over never getting paid. Airports wouldn't sell him fuel unless he paid his balances. Myra was suing him for not paying alimony and child support. And finally, in Denver, his plane was raided by drug agents.
Though the plane was loaded with prescription drugs, they had all been prescribed by Dr. Nick, so they were legal.
He wrecked his Rolls Royce again in November of 1976, but by then, his antics were starting to get old and extremely dangerous, and this time, he was arrested for driving while intoxicated.
As he was released from the jail, reporters surrounded him and he lashed out, asking why they always gave him a hard time and let Elvis off the hook, saying,
"Y'all hate my guts or something. I'm no angel, of course, but yeah, I'm a pretty nice guy."
Of course, Elvis wasn't getting into bar fights and repeated drunk driving accidents, attacking waitresses, shooting his bassist, and abandoning his children. But that rivalry was always there. Jerry Lee couldn't let it go.
On November 27th, 1976, Jerry Lee was drinking at the Vapors nightclub in Memphis when the owner apparently gave him a brand new over and under .38 Derringer pocket pistol.
At some point, Jerry stripped off his shirt and was wearing only a leather vest. He was red-faced and wild-eyed, his nose scarred and swollen.
At 3 a.m, Jerry left the bar, completely wasted, a bottle of champagne in one hand and the Derringer in the other. He hopped into his white Lincoln Continental and went speeding off to Graceland, the home of Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll.
He came barreling down the lane, tires screeching, and slammed right into the famous gates, adorned with wrought iron musical notes.
In drunken madness, he smashed out his window with the champagne bottle, then leapt out of the car, waving the Derringer around.
According to some accounts, Jerry Lee Lewis said he was there to assassinate the king, take back the crown that was rightfully his.
But according to Jerry Lee, despite smashing into the gates in the middle of the night with a pistol, he was just there to pay a friendly visit, saying Elvis had at some point invited him to drop on by, and the gun was out because it would be illegal to conceal it. Putting the pistol in the glove box would have been concealing a deadly weapon. So legally, he just had to have it out.
The police came racing out, Jerry screaming at them, threatening them as they handcuffed him and stuffed him in their cruiser. As Jerry Lee would say,
"Well, the cops asked Elvis, 'What do you want us to do?' And Elvis told him, 'Lock him up.' That hurt my feelings. To be scared of me, knowing me the way he did, was ridiculous. He hurt me. I never did see him again after that."
Chapter 7. An Army Marches on Its Stomach.
Jerry Lee Lewis seemed indestructible, but something was bound to give. And that thing was his stomach. He'd filled his stomach with so much whiskey and pills that he'd given himself a peptic ulcer. He'd literally burned a hole right through his stomach.
He was briefly hospitalized, but then right back at it again.
In August of 1977, he recorded the aptly titled Middle Age Crazy.
His cousin Jimmy Swaggart was now a huge star, selling millions of gospel albums, with his own television show, beaming out to 143 countries, asking people to fall to their knees and pray to the television set.
And Cousin Jimmy had taken his spiritual war against rock and roll to new levels.
He called rock and roll the new pornography, even railing against Christian rock music and writing a book called Religious Rock and Roll, A Wolf in Sheep's Clothing.
His church in Baton Rouge held 7,500 people, all shouting hallelujah as he condemned rock and roll as the devil's music.
Like his cousin Jerry Lee, Jimmy Swaggart became so rich he bought his own airplane to fly around in, preaching and playing piano in huge sold-out stadiums.
Then on August 16th, 1977, Jerry Lee's old nemesis, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was found dead on his bathroom floor, overweight and strung out on pills.
When interviewed by the press, the killer said he was glad the king was dead.
Cold, man. So cold.
Elvis and Jerry Lee, the king and the killer, alike in so many ways. They were both Southern country boys who'd loved their mothers more than anything, both from families that picked cotton and struggled to survive. Both had been truck drivers before making it big. But there was a difference. Elvis was a soulful black-haired angel from Tennessee. Jerry was a yellow-haired demon from Louisiana. Elvis sang slow and soulful, accompanied by guitars and horns and violins. Jerry played boogie-woogie as fast as humanly possible, screaming, often with just a bassist and a drummer backing him up, hating the polished sound of an orchestra. Elvis was a soul the world couldn't help but love. Jerry Lee was a soul the world loved to hate.
Elvis never appeared to acknowledge the feud with his old friend Jerry Lee. He was always kind and cordial. When Jerry Lee came to see Elvis play in Las Vegas, Elvis welcomed him and backstage asked him to play some songs on the piano, telling him how incredibly talented he was.
But for Jerry Lee, that title, the King of Rock and Roll, was just too much for him to stand. He'd forever been trying to take it, claiming at one point Elvis had literally relinquished it to him after being drafted, something that may or may not be true.
Chapter 8. The Tax Man.
Jerry Lee Lewis was literally plowing through money, spending it as fast as he could on guns, jewelry, liquor, wrecking fancy sports cars, buying friends and family Cadillacs, while at the same time not paying his bandmates or his alimony and child support. And according to the federal government, he was also not paying his taxes.
The IRS first came after him in January of 1979, saying he owed over $1 million in back taxes, raiding his house and confiscating his luxury cars and motorcycles, gold and diamonds, pianos and classic guitars, an arsenal of weapons, many of them expensive antiques. Also finding $31,000 in cash in a paper bag stuffed in his bathroom cabinet.
Jerry said about the IRS raid on his home,
"I think they're pretty cruel people, taking away my cars."
And 1979 would prove to be a very cruel year to Jerry Lee Lewis. Very cruel indeed.
In the spring of 1979, he officially filed for divorce from Jaren, saying that they'd only lived together as man and wife for 2 weeks, and that had been 8 years earlier.
She countersued him, accusing him of years of cruelty and drunkenness, abuse and neglect.
And on the 21st of July, 1979, Jerry Lee's father, Elmo, died from stomach cancer, most likely from the chemical plants and agricultural runoff that had poisoned many of the swamps and rivers of eastern Louisiana.
Elmo was more than just a father. He was Jerry's bodyguard, unofficial tour manager, and partner in crime.
It was Elmo's love and encouragement that had made Jerry a star. Elmo had literally mortgaged the family farm to buy Jerry his first piano.
Elmo Lewis was buried beside Mammy in the family graveyard, little Elmo Jr. between them.
Then Jerry was arrested for possession of pills, and Dr. Nick was indicted over prescribing pills to the now deceased Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee, and 8 others, including himself. Yes, he was indicted for overprescribing himself pills. Wild. And he was acquitted and found innocent, even though he'd technically been responsible for the death of the king of rock and roll.
Although he was found innocent in court, He would have his medical license taken away and no longer be able to write prescriptions. When asked about Dr. Nick, Jerry would say,
Dr. Nick was a good man, a remarkable man. If I thought I could get some blues and yellows at him, I'd call him right now.
Guess some people never learn. Even with a hole in his stomach, Jerry kept partying, kept performing.
He was in Dayton, Ohio, wasted, high out of his mind, stumbling across the stage and challenging the crowd to fight him, saying, "Come on, fight me," when who should step onto the stage but Jimmy Swaggart.
Jimmy told his cousin Jerry Lee that he would fight him right then and there if it meant saving his eternal soul. He opened his arms to his rock and roll cousin and took him to his home in Baton Rouge.
There in Baton Rouge for 6 days, Jerry tried out at his cousin's house, going cold turkey. No pills, no booze, and eating tubs of shrimp a day. That's a good cure. I like that. I'll try that one. Then Jerry went on his way again. But 6 days of sobriety and prayer didn't do too much to change the killer. He was back to the devil's music and his sinning ways.
On June 30th, 1981, he began spitting up blood and was taken to the Methodist Hospital in Memphis, where a doctor told him, "I'm gonna operate on you, Jerry Lee, but I'm telling you there's no use in it, 'cause you know you don't have a chance."
Jerry Lee just laughed at death and said, "Well, in that case, can you give me a pain shot?"
The doctor just sighed and told the nurse to give him whatever he wanted. It didn't make no difference now anyway.
For nearly 5 hours, the doctor operated. And afterwards, Jerry Lee lay close to death for a week when it was discovered stomach acids were leaking into his abdominal cavity. And he was operated on again. Doctors telling his family his chances were 50-50, and it was a minute-to-minute condition.
Johnny Cash came to the hospital to say his goodbyes and prayed over his old friend.
Jerry Lee Lewis was in the hospital 93 days, but the killer pulled through. And in January 1982, just 4 months after being released from the hospital, he was back on stage at the Tennessee Performing Arts Center for a tribute called 25 Years of Jerry Lee Lewis. His old friend Johnny Cash telling him up on stage,
"You never looked better, buddy."
Chapter 9, Sean Stevens.
Not much writing love songs. Hell, I never even tried. With 1,000 things gone wrong, here's one thing that is right. I run back to you, and you come back to me again. Wildfires burning, and they're packing up for war. Seems like nobody's learning.
In February 1982, Jerry Lee was playing the Hyatt Lounge in Dearborn, Michigan, when he met a pretty 25-year-old cocktail waitress named Sean Stevens.
Just as he'd been doing since the 50s, he picked her out of the crowd and sang her songs right from the stage.
They had a whirlwind romance, her family telling her to stay away from him, that he seemed dangerous and unhinged, and was old enough to be her father. But she said he needed her and they were in love, and he promised to marry her after his divorce was final.
But that divorce was looking to be a disaster for Jerry Lee Lewis. Between the IRS, Myra, and now this new divorce, he was set to lose everything and have to declare bankruptcy.
But he needn't have worried, for on June 9th, 1982, while sunbathing at a friend's house outside Memphis, Jaren mysteriously drowned in a swimming pool. No one saw a thing. No one knows how it happened. She was just dead there in the pool, and the police called it an accident, and the case was closed.
Sure was convenient. With his stomach all fucked up, he needed a new way to ingest drugs, and took to shooting up with a syringe. As he would later say, "I like them shots."
Jesus. He'd play concerts and the IRS would be right there to confiscate the money. He said,
"They were all after me. I didn't pay no attention to them. I just kept on rocking."
And with his last wife now dead and in the grave, on June 7th, 1983, Jerry put on a white tuxedo with a ruffled red shirt and married his fifth wife, Shawn Stevens, just as he'd promised he'd do. He was 47, she was 25.
They had a wild life in Mississippi of group sex, bourbon, drugs, and just 77 days after their marriage, she was found dead in a spare room, laid out on a perfectly made bed.
Though there were scratch marks on Jerry and blood on his slippers, broken glass on the floor, and she had bruises, broken fingernails, and blood on her, it was ruled an accident by the county investigators, who were all in Jerry's pocket and treated him like royalty.
Jerry paid for the autopsy right out of his own pocket, and the coroner signed the death certificate without ever even having seen the body.
That is just insane. Her body was dragged out to the family graveyard in Louisiana and buried there with all the rest of the Lewis clan, folks noting at the funeral that Jerry looked like he was dressed to go dancing.
The next night, Jerry was in a honky-tonk, drinking and singing, asking for syringes, and complaining that the law had come and taken away all his needles.
Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Richard Kramer wrote an exposé for Rolling Stone magazine called The Strange and Mysterious Death of Mrs. Jerry Lee Lewis. And Geraldo Rivera investigated it as well, finding a bodyguard that said he'd seen Jerry Lee beat her.
But the public was just tired of all the Jerry Lee Lewis drama. After a lifetime of insane antics, nothing really surprised them anymore. And soon the deaths were forgotten, and Jerry had a new girlfriend named Carrie McCarver. She was 21, and they got married on April 24th, 1984, making her his sixth wife.
He's still playing, still recording, and in May of 1986, he made an album with Johnny Cash, Carl Perkins, and Roy Orbison called Class of 55.
He's still shooting up speed, and he ended up with a huge infection in his thigh. Then his stomach was perforated yet again, and 6 doctors had to be flown in to perform an operation, cutting away a third of his stomach.
He awoke to find his old friend Carl Perkins at his bedside, staring down at him like an old rock and roll angel. And Jerry said,
"Hey, Carl, what are you doing here?"
Chapter 10. Cousin Jimmy's Fall from Grace.
Meanwhile, Cousin Jimmy had got himself all caught up in some crazy drama.
First, he started accusing another minister, Marvin Gorman, of having multiple affairs, causing Marvin to be defrocked.
And then Marvin turned around and sued Jimmy Swaggart for $10 million for slander and libel, and won. Though on appeal, they eventually settled on $1.75 million.
But Marvin Gorman wasn't done with his revenge. He evidently knew something, for he had Jimmy Swaggart followed, and sure enough, found him meeting with a prostitute at a travel inn in New Orleans.
As Jerry Lee said, "Was I surprised? Nah, I was never surprised. He just weakened and fell. I guess we all have our weak points."
On live television, beaming around the world in his church packed with more than 8,000 followers, Jimmy Swaggart gave a tearful confession.
Tears streaming down his face, weeping, cousin Jimmy Swaggart said,
"I have sinned against you. I have sinned against you, my Lord, and I would ask that your precious blood would wash and cleanse every stain until it is in the seas of God's forgetfulness, and never to be remembered against me anymore."
The Assemblies of God ministries defrocked him, took away his credentials and his minister license. But Swaggart went on, became an independent and non-denominational Pentecostal minister, establishing Jimmy Swaggart Ministries, and Jimmy Swaggart's following grew. It actually grew. Getting caught with a prostitute in New Orleans actually got cousin Jimmy more followers, and the money was just pouring in.
But it only lasted 3 years before he was again caught with a prostitute, this time by police in California.
Oops! But rather than tearfully confessing his sins to his congregation, as he'd done the last time, this time Jimmy Swaggart told those at the Family Worship Center,
"The Lord has told me, it's flat none of your business."
Swaggart then temporarily stepped down as head of his ministry for a, quote, time of healing and counseling.
On January 28, 1987, Jerry Lee Lewis III was born. Carrie was 24, Jerry 51.
A year later, he'd finally give in and declare bankruptcy, being $3 million in debt at this point. Most of it to the IRS, the rest owed to hospitals, clubs for breach of contract, failed payments on various Cadillacs and Corvettes. But before declaring bankruptcy, he was sure to send $7,000 in cash to repair the old Pentecostal Assembly of God church his namesake Uncle Lee had built all those many, many, many years ago.
A movie about his early life came out in 1989. Dennis Quaid playing Jerry Lee and Winona Ryder playing Myra. It bombed in the box office and would be played endlessly on cable television, ensuring the legend of the killer was established with a whole new MTV generation.
Jerry Lee moved to Dublin, Ireland, where musicians are exempt from taxes, something I did not know. But evidently, that doesn't include past debt because the IRS raided his house in Ireland nonetheless, seizing 2 grand pianos, a pinball machine, a pink Cadillac, a signed Fats Domino poster, and even the original piano Elmo had mortgaged the family farm to buy for Jerry.
Agents listed the old piano as without value and in horrible condition, and somehow Jerry Lee was able to finagle it back. They could take it all, but they wasn't taking the piano his daddy gave him that started it all.
Chapter 11, The Last Man Standing.
In 1998, Jerry's sixth wife, Carrie, filed for divorce, saying he was unfaithful and a hopeless and serial adulterer.
Really? I am so shocked. Jerry watched as the punk rock underground bubbled up into the mainstream with grunge culture and weird as hell rock stars emerged. Nirvana coming and going in a flash, Marilyn Manson, and Trent Reznor, who played a grand piano just like him. Jerry saying, I've seen them, these new so-called bad boys. They try. They really try. I see it, and it's phony as it can be.
He was now officially a cranky old man, but you can't stop the killer. His peers were dropping like flies. Roy Orbison in 1988, Charlie Rich in 95, Carl Perkins in 98, Johnny Cash in 2003, and in 2003 Sam Phillips died, the man who'd made them all stars and championed rock and roll.
Now Jerry Lee Lewis was literally the last man standing.
He then made a new record, a tribute to himself called The Last Man Standing, featuring Bruce Springsteen, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Jimmy Page, Merle Haggard, Eric Clapton, Neil Young, and Rod Stewart. Even Kid Rock.
Last Man Standing made it to number 26 on the Billboard Top 100, number 8 in country, number 4 in rock, and was the number 1 independently produced album. Yes, at 71 years old, he was back with a number 1 album. But when asked about it all, he said,
Am I satisfied with how it's all gone? I don't think so.
Playing at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2009, at 74 years old, he played a whole lot of shaking going on, jumping up and kicking the bench across the stage. The killer still had it, which is insane. How did this speed freak alcoholic outlive all his rock and roll peers? How did this sociopath, thief, arrested numerous times, who married his own 13-year-old cousin, threatened to kill Elvis, who abandoned numerous wives and children, refused to pay child support or pay his taxes, not get canceled, and always find his way back into society's good graces? It almost makes you think it was the devil's music, and he'd sold his soul for rock and roll, just like Robert Johnson and Jimmy Page.
His 40th album was called Mean Old Man, and on his 75th birthday, the album officially entered the Billboard Top 100.
Fucking hey, dude. It's insane, man. But he was finally starting to slow down. He was getting sick. He was elderly. And at some point, he needed a caregiver. And in that weird, tangled family ties they all had, a woman named Judith Brown, who was his brother-in-law's wife and Myra's sister-in-law, came to care for him.
Judith was married. Her husband was a big fan of Jerry's and had pressured her to become his caretaker. But the killer managed to seduce her nonetheless. And in 2010, she divorced her husband, and she and Jerry became engaged.
And on March 9th, 2012, at 76 years old, Jerry Lee Lewis married his 7th wife.
It's just too much. Still fiery, in 2017, he sued his daughter, who'd been his business manager, saying she owed him money and was talking shit about him on Facebook.
And the things this guy has lived through. The birth of rock and roll, the tumult of the 1960s, the insanity of the 70s, glam, punk, grunge. And now here he is in 2017 arguing with his daughter on Facebook.
Yeah, that's like blowing my mind. In October 2022, Jerry Lee Lewis was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. He was 87 years old.
But all things must pass. And on October 28th, 2022, in Nesbitt, Mississippi, at the ripe old age of 87, Jerry Lee Lewis passed from this earth.
His funeral was held on November 5th, 2022, in his hometown of Faraday, Louisiana, in the Pentecostal church his Uncle Lee had built while his daddy was in prison.
He was buried there in the family cemetery that held his parents, his brother, his sons and wives, and the service was officiated by none other than Cousin Jimmy Swaggart.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of the killer, Jerry Lee Lewis. We hope you've enjoyed it.
What a fucking story. Oh my God, what a story.
Well, so I'm curious, do you think he killed two of his wives? Or do you think it's just a coincidence?
I mean, I really don't know, but that Sean, they say she died of methadone. And then one of the things that the sheriff had said, well, there was no sign that she had been forced methadone. But the funeral director was like, she had a clear hypodermic needle sign in her that was never talked about by anybody else. The funeral director is really the only person who came forward. And all he said was, I'm not saying he killed her. I just think there should be an investigation.
And the other part of the story that I feel like maybe I should have mentioned in the moment, did I hear it correctly that she was buried with the Lewises, like with Jerry Lee's family?
Yes.
So like but her family didn't want her to get together with him in the first place. So they weren't like suspicious and pushing for an investigation?
Yeah, they were super pissed off and super angry and angry at the cops and came out openly and were like, why is no one, and they're from Michigan. And I guess they didn't have much money. They were like, and he's like this huge rich rock star, and they did. And no one cared. No one did anything. And the wife before that drowned so mysteriously. And like, I don't think that he personally did it, but come on, man. Like, she just mysteriously drowns in a friend's swimming pool. She's at this random house and gets found dead in the swimming pool at this time when she was about to ruin his life and take away all his money.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
I hate to say someone was a murderer and they're not, but it's mighty fucking suspicious. It really, really is.
Yeah, I second that very strong opinion. But you know, we are not judge nor jury, so we will leave the facts for the listeners to decide themselves.
And I want to give a big shout out to Resting on Pretty for letting us use their song Fierce Claws. If you are into goth, dark wave, definitely give Resting on Pretty a listen. Great stuff. We'll put some links in the show notes. And do you have a band you'd like us to feature? Do you have a case you'd like us to cover? You got some crazy information you think we should know about? Or you just want to say hi? Drop us a line at murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. That's murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Standing there with the red dress on. Back right up here at this piano where Mr. Pine Top is. That's right, face the audience. Now when I tell you to hold yourself, you get ready to stop. You hear? And when I say stop, don't you move a peg. And when I say get it, I want you to shake that thing. Hold yourself now. Stop. Shake that thing. That's what I'm talking about.